Welcome to our first webinar on navigating agility. I'm Chenko, and I'm thrilled to be your host today. Let's start by meeting our expert panel. First, we have Jerry Doucette. Jerry is an expert agility coach and the founder of Evolutionize. With 3 decades of experience in technology and software development initiatives and over 2 decades in project management and agile coaching, Jerry has trained, certified, coached dozens of organizations, hundreds of teams, and thousands of people around the globe to help them achieve their goals by embracing agility. Kalyan is the CEO and partner at Mantrax. Kalyan is an experienced and passionate software engineer with 15 years of proven track record in developing a wide range of applications across many sectors. Kalyan has designed applications for startups ranging to large Canadian public corporations. And last, we have Ranganath Damanna. Rangnath is the Director of Project Delivery at Mantrax. Rangnath is an accomplished software engineer, manager with over 25 years of history in navigating product development, teams in a dynamic and innovative companies. Rangnath's expertise spans over the entire software lifecycle, and I'm sure he has many war stories on Agile to share with us today. Before we kick things off, let's take a quick look at the agenda. First, we're going to explore the fundamental principles of agility, led by Jerry. Next, Kalyan's going to do a quick introduction to Scrum, one of the most widely used frameworks within the Agile world. And finally, our panel is going to discuss and talk about the Agile mindset, the challenges that teams face today in adopting Agile practices, and strategies for successful adoption. We'll also talk about a comparison between Waterfall and Agile as well. Now, before I get started, I do want to address that there are many project management techniques out there, such as Waterfall and Agile. Each has its own set of pros and cons. I want to acknowledge and respect both approaches as they have their place in different contexts and industries. Waterfall, it is structured and sequential approach and has been the cornerstone of project management for decades. It is predictable, well-suited for projects with stable requirements. On the other hand, Agile, with this adaptive nature, offers flexibility, responsiveness to change, which is crucial for today's dynamic business environments. Now, I understand some of you may have preferences for one methodology over other, and that's completely okay, and we respect both. In this webinar, please note that it is dedicated to exploring the practices and principles of agility. So without further ado, let's delve into our first topic, understanding the Agile mindset. And over to you, Jerry.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful introduction. I'm really looking forward to this. I have a real passion for talking about this, and I think hopefully you'll pick this up as we go along. So if you can go to the first slide after this one here, what we're really talking about when we talk about agility, it really is this concept that Agile is this mindset. It is concepts and disciplines all aligned towards this whole mindset, this thought about helping develop an organization to becoming a leading organization, the one that learns, one that inspects, one that adapts, and one that improves. All of this is really centered around customer-focused delivery. We're talking about solutions for them. We're talking about delivering specific value that that customer wants. One of the things that I like to say is, Agile is, and I try to use analogies where possible, Agile to me it's like an umbrella. It's an umbrella term. It's not sort of a specific thing. It's not a practice. It's not a checkbox or a list that you do. It's this mindset, the philosophy that you live. And what we're going to do is we're going to spend a few minutes now sort of diving into what this means for organizations and how it sort of helps you develop and deliver solutions to customers. So this whole philosophy, it really is this collection of practices and tools. It's where we take our mind to help get us to where we want to be. So when I talk about philosophy, the whole concept here is the mindset is about delivering value. It's about getting fast feedback. It's about learning from those experiences and using those learning loops to then improve the products that we build and the way that we do them. It's about making sure that the customer is getting the right things and that we're building them right. So it's both of these things working together. So we're talking about a collection of practices. We mentioned a few minutes ago Scrum. We're going to do a deeper dive into Scrum. Scrum is one of those tools that I like to put in the Agile toolbox That's another analogy that I'll come back to in a little while. But it really is just a collection of tools that help us get to where we want to be. There's techniques and frameworks and methods that all sit underneath this umbrella or in this toolbox, but they're all focused at helping us deliver value to our customers. It's not about delivering everything faster. It's about delivering the most important things faster, getting fast feedback, and then inspecting and adapting. It's about making sure that we're building the right things for the markets and we can adapt to those. So when we talk about agility, there's some key potential outcomes that actually come out of agility. There's probably too many to put in a slide, but I thought I'd touch on these 6 really quickly because these seem to be key for a lot of the organizations that we work with. One of them is a faster time to market. I mentioned a few minutes ago that it's not about delivering everything faster, but it is about delivering the most important pieces faster. And that enables us to then deliver that value and get that fast feedback so that we can make sure we're building the right things. So we can make an early pivot or preserve decision. Improved transparency is part of this too. It's really about seeing what are the problems, right? There's no skinny mirrors with agility, or there shouldn't be. We should be able to see what's going on. We should be able to see the problems, the issues that we're challenged with, and we should be able to tackle those head on and build strategies. It's about knowing where we're doing well and maybe where we're struggling so that we can bolster that. It's about being honest about falling behind schedule based on what our predictions and our forecasts were and trying to find ways to deal with that now rather than trying to make it up before the deadline. Enhanced customer satisfaction is key to agility too. This is all central to the agile mindset. It's about making sure we are in a service delivery or service orientation mindset. It's about making sure our customers are getting what they need and sometimes even anticipating what their needs are before they can even articulate it, which is really difficult, but it's a fabulous place to be when we're developing software and products and services. When we talk about delivering faster and we delivering solutions to customers, what we want to do though is we want to make sure that we're not sacrificing quality. So quality is not an option to be sacrificed here. So when we talk about the triple threat for projects, quality is inherent in everything that we do. We must make sure that we're not sacrificing quality just to get things out to market faster. It's about giving them the right things, making sure that they're good quality so that they can use those and give us that feedback quickly. That's tied to these more appropriate solutions, making sure that we're servicing those needs and solving those customer problems for them, making sure that we inspect and adapt. And we may not know things up front. We'll talk a little bit about that later on as well. And the most important one that I like to talk about, this is the one that often gets forgotten, is increased employee engagement. Quite often we sacrifice employee satisfaction and engagement at the cost of delivering value faster to our customers or to satisfying our shareholders. What I like to say is agility is about building a sustainable pace, one that you can work at indefinitely, where people are motivated to show up to work. They want to help. They want to solve customer problems. They feel like they're contributing to a solution. So all of these together are some key outcomes that we see with agility. Next slide. Some characteristics that we see with agile practices I'd like to call out as well. Engagement and alignment at all levels. So agility is not just about training your team to use agile practices and then setting them loose. They need support. Top to bottom, left to right, the entire organization needs to change its mindset as well. So in the surface, it sounds fairly simple. Get a team trained, launch agile, inspect and adapt and learn. There's a lot more that goes behind it. We need everybody in the organization supporting this concept, this mindset. The focus on delivering value to the customer is really the rally point for a lot of the organizations that we work with as well. It's about making sure that everybody is working towards that common goal, satisfying the customer, giving them what they need. Being outcome driven versus output driven is another key differentiator. I'm not saying that it's not important to deliver X number of widgets to a customer. If that's what they want, if that's what they value, then certainly we need to do that. But we do have a tendency in agile practices to really shift towards being outcome driven, solving problems, delivering value, making things better for customers. So focusing on the outcomes versus just purely the outputs. Helping us become learning organizations as well as key to agility. This is how they all use the inspect and adapt, right? If we're not learning, if we're not learning by doing, then we're not living the agile values. So a good organization that is adopting agility will be a learning organization. And I want to summarize this by saying that we cannot forget the importance of leadership. Leadership is pivotal in this. If we don't include leadership, if the leadership isn't engaged, if they're not literally rolling up their sleeves and saying, how can I help? How can I help this organization do better? How can I help you service our customers or our users or our needs or our members better? That's critical. We need leadership to lead the organization. We need people to also, therefore, show have leadership at all levels. We want to encourage that to happen. So it's not just about the leaders saying there's where we're going, but it's also about everybody stepping up to the plate and saying, how can I help in servicing this need as well? One of the key things that I think often gets overlooked, that it's a critical component to agility, is that we have this collective ownership mindset. Agile promotes collaboration. It is inherent in everything that we see. When you read the Agile Manifesto, it talks about we are doing things better. And that's what we're talking about, whole team collective ownership. It's not about one department finishing their step and throwing it over the wall to somebody else. It's about systems thinking, end to end, from concept to cash, from the time we get asked to build something, to the time we commit, to the time we build it, to the time we deliver it, and then we service it afterwards. Everybody should be stepping up to the plate. There's no heroes. There's no scapegoats. There's no finger pointing when things go wrong. For example, and I'm just going to pick on testing for a second, if testing isn't finished by the end of a sprint, we don't blame the testers. The team should collectively say, what do we need to do next time to make sure that we also get testing done? Everything that's included in our definition of done. And I just wanted to call that out, that it's whole team collective ownership. It's shared ownership of everything from end to end. Next slide. One of the other things I like to call out is that agility, it is this philosophy and this mindset, but there's something that we're really driving towards, right? Businesses shouldn't be saying Agile is the goal, right? Agile is that toolbox. It's a philosophy, it's a mindset. But one of the things you can do is understand that what we're really trying to achieve is what we call business agility. This is where organizations are able to be nimble, right? They can service their customers' needs. And this is especially important in today's day and age with the service industry and the software development industry. We do this by building interconnected systems, looking at how we manage the work, looking at the services that we provide, the systematic evolutionary improvement. So it's important for us to be able to change to the change or to respond to the changing needs of the organization that we're within, but also our customers, the environment around us. This is what business agility is about. To do that, what we're talking about is using a successive improvement cycles. So running experiments, also known as Kaizens from Lean. This is talking about evolutionary improvements. So over time, we try one thing, we measure, we learn, right? So we're not only developing our products and services better, what we're also doing is we're developing the ways that we work, how we engage one another, how we work with our customers and engage them in that. And what we do eventually is evolve towards this target state, this better state, knowing that where we are, there are improvements, but we may not know necessarily what those are coming up. Not every inspect and adapt cycle is going to be successful, though, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. Sometimes failure will happen. It's how we respond to that failure that distinguishes us between Agile and other practices. And just to sort of summarize this, one of the things I want to call out is that, even when we're helping organizations adopt agility, it's not about coming up with a well laid out plan. Whether we're building software or a process, or we're building a solution or a service, or we're rolling out agility in our organization, it's not just about defining a plan and executing on it. Many times things are messy. There are unknown unknowns. There's always ambiguity. The key is to have a bias for action, start the learning by doing, and then inspect and adapt and leverage those learning cycles as we go along.
Okay, so I'll talk about the Scrum process, and this is going to be a very brief overview because Scrum in itself is probably a topic of a whole, entire webinar. but I will go over this diagram to explain what the Scrum process is. At the very high level, it's a framework, and this framework facilitates iterative development of software products. There are three pillars to a Scrum process: collaboration, flexibility, and customer feedback. Now, if you look at the left-hand side of the screen, you'll see that there are the user stories. The user stories are basically requirements that have come from the users of the system. It could be coming from various stakeholders, but it's up to the product owner or the product sponsor to create a backlog. It's basically a prioritized list of features, enhancements, and bug fixes. It's up to the product owner to manage and prioritize what shows up on the product backlog from the user stories. Once the product backlog has been created, next comes the sprint planning. The sprint planning typically happens at the beginning of the sprint, and this is where the entire Agile team or the project team selects a set of items from the product backlog to work during the sprints. The sprints are typically 2 weeks to 4 weeks, usually 2. I have never really seen a sprint that's like a month long. And that's probably the whole reason why we want to do Agile. Like, you do things faster, you break fast, and you get feedback as soon as you can. And the tasks that show up on the sprint planning session are again based on the priority set by the product owner. Once the product sprint has been created, items have now moved from the product backlog into the sprint backlog. So the sprint backlog basically represents the work that the team has signed up to commit to finish in the 2-week sprints or the 4-week sprints. Now, during the 2-week sprints, the ritual is to have a daily Scrum meeting. And what happens in the Scrum meeting, it's a brief call, usually 15 minutes, right? Maybe 15 minutes to 30 minutes, but try to be as concise and as brief as possible. There is an agenda on these sprint daily Scrum calls. There are 3 questions to be answered, like what you worked on yesterday, what are you working on today, and if there are any roadblocks. My personal favorite is if there are any roadblocks, because what happens in a non-Agile project is the team encounters a roadblock and they'll send an email to the product owner or to some business analyst or whoever is the subject matter expert. They'll copy a whole bunch of people and they'll wait for their reply, and then they will react on it. And this could be like, a day, 2 days, even more, who knows? Somebody could be on vacation, whatnot. With this, what are you working on and what you worked on, and if there are any roadblocks, the product owner and other stakeholders are in the room and they can clarify this right away. So that wait period goes away. So this is probably one of my favorite things about working in an Agile project. Now, after the 2 weeks is done, next comes the sprint review. So this is an end of sprint ritual. And what happens during the sprint review is typically a demo of the work that was done in the last 2 weeks. It could be functioning software. It could be, an architecture document. It could be some kind of documentation that was prepared, or it could be just a plan for the future sprints. The idea of this end of sprint demo is to get feedback from the users. It's from the different project stakeholders, from the product owners, and even from the team. And based on the feedback, you make adjustments to the product backlog. Something that you thought was a priority earlier may not be a priority after the 2 weeks. And something else might be picked up from, a lower priority item could become a higher priority. So it's basically reprioritizing and moving things along, adjusting to customer feedback and moving forward based on that feedback. Now, as Jerry mentioned earlier, I think Jerry or Chinkel, the last piece of this Agile Scrum process, the 2-week sprints, is the sprint retrospective. This is a chance for all the project members to come together and provide feedback. And typically it's done using software, but you may do it verbally. It's a place where you would discuss what went well, what didn't go well, and if there is any kind of appreciation, like somebody did like a lot of work and they pulled more weight than anybody expected, or they did something amazing. This is a place where you get feedback and appreciation, so the team it's just a celebration at the end of the 2 weeks. And this process, as I said, is an iterative process. So this continues again for the next sprint. Okay, back to you, Chinkel.
Great. Thank you, both Jerry and Kalyan for the overview. Now I'm excited about the next session the most because I know, Jerry, with you training, hundreds of teams across the globe, and Kalyan and Ragnath, I mean, I hear your daily stories from our project work. So I know the practical reality, combining the practical reality with the theory is always a balancing act. So let's get into some of the questions that we typically get on Agile. So the first one I want to start off with is, Jerry, with your overview. I know, principle number one in the Agile Manifesto states that our highest priority is to satisfy the customer through the early and continuous delivery of valuable software. I mean, this is great, but this could also lead to requirements creeping and exceeding the budget. For example, too many wireframes or too many things on the wish list. How can that be managed?
Oh, yeah. I have to say this really resonates with me because prior to working using agile practices, I was a traditional waterfall project manager. And my early days in introductions to agile practices, and that this was one of my key concerns was scope creep. It looked like scope creep when you look at the Agile Manifesto in this specific statement. But at the end of the day, when we think about what we're actually trying to do, the goal really is to deliver customer value by ensuring that our work aligns with our own strategic objectives. And unfortunately, we need to acknowledge that sometimes customers and our users don't truly know what they need or how to articulate those types of needs. And sometimes we have to be honest, we misinterpret those requests. This is part of being human. It's part of the evolution, and it's the reason why we are using evolutionary approaches to this, and that's why Agile fits really well. Because when you ask yourself how many gated or waterfall engagements you've worked on that have had no change requests, I'm betting it's very few. I ask this question all the time in my classes. Occasionally I'll get a hand up, but it's usually a very small, contained initiative. And that means despite our best efforts, we sometimes miss stuff. It's the truth. Like, we just have to be honest about this. It means we need to embrace and accept the fact that change is inevitable, especially when we're building net new things with unknown unknowns, which means we need to be adaptable. So having faster development, delivery, and feedback loops is going to actually help us mitigate building the wrong things early and creates the opportunity for us to pivot or preserve quickly based on that feedback. Could be a request, could be a change to something we have, could be a whole net new feature, which is the scope creep we're talking about here. So if we use Agile properly, these iterative development practices mean we're not waiting 12 months to discover a problem, or that we missed a requirement, or that there's an additional thing that was missed. Instead, we are creating the conditions that allow us to discover this in a much shorter time span. So then with constant feedback and user engagement and validation of our work, like the sprint reviews we were talking about that happen in Scrum, we can ensure we're building the right things and that we're building them right. And the other part for this, to me, really is about transparency and honesty. If we need to adapt and plan to build a more appropriate solution for our customer, even though it may not be part of the original contract or agreement, we need to leverage this empiricism to reforecast based on this new current information. So it means having to potentially adjust our schedule or our budget to account for this new information, these new requirements, these things that traditionally were seen as scope creep, net new features that were maybe missed in the initial speculations, because we don't get everything up front. There's unknown unknowns. So in other words, change isn't locked down. Change is inherent in an Agile practice and an Agile system. So I consider Agile to be more compatible or aligned with time and materials types approach than a fixed type approach. It works either way, but it works particularly well with that, which means we can constantly reforecast and be transparent about the costs and the things that we missed. And there's two value statements in the Agile Manifesto that clarify this, come to mind here. One is we value customer collaboration over contract negotiation. It doesn't mean instead of, it means we work with the customer to solve their problems. And it means we don't do it at a loss, we provide options. There's always business options, so it provides us that transparency. And the other one is we value responding to change over following a plan. So again, I want to point out, this isn't about not having a plan, right? It's about constantly inspecting and adapting that plan. So hopefully that helps a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll call on Ragnath to comment. How are you managing, scope creep in the Agile framework on a day-to-day basis?
Okay. So scope creep, as Jerry said, like, we probably may not know everything at the beginning. So it's ideally, in an ideal world, probably you can avoid scope creep, but in a real time situation, that's kind of inevitable. But we could make sure that it is minimized. So one of the things is like having a proper grooming meetings, understand the requirement up front, and ask questions. So the team has to be, and again, it depends upon various people coming together and collaborating. Like, Agile is always collaboration. You have the product owner, you have an architect, you have a team lead, and you have the development team. So it's very, very important for the product owner, the first guy, to write a good product story, and then explain in a grooming meeting, and give time for the team to see and understand and ask some specific questions. It's not it's, you cannot assume that product owner can write detailed story. Sometimes it's we have to ask questions, and they probably will say, yeah, it's required, yeah, not required. And team has to understand that. So basically, having proper grooming meetings, having proper planning sessions, and proper preparation before the planning, and that makes the story well defined, and that will reduce the scope creep. So that's, but again, the scope creep related to the business priorities changing. Somebody says there's a P1 bug coming, that cannot be avoided. But what we can handle is, uh, based on the past situations, and if you have released a big production release, you can keep aside certain bandwidth in your sprint cycles to handle such situations. So you can be prepared to handle scope creep, but it's definitely cannot be avoided.
Does it make sense to have Agile?
Yes, I'm a firm believer that it does, that that Agile is actually ideally suited to small projects. It's not about that Jerry mentioned, and that one of the things that resonated in what Jerry said in his part of our session today was, it is a mindset. So this is not about technology, it's about communication and collaboration. So, and through that, it's the creation of customer value, and it's the creation of customer value early, and allowing stakeholders to see the progress on the project and provide feedback just works in favor of project success. So yeah, I would say that that the agile mindset is suited to small projects.
One of the other question that was there, and this was for, I believe this is for Ranganath, is people often think that Agile is a process heavy and they don't want to learn new tools and techniques. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah. So people who haven't been using Agile probably will be tempted to think it's a process heavy, but in reality, it's opposite. Agile doesn't specify that you have to follow a certain way to do things. It's about individual interactions and collaboration and communication. That's the main important thing. But yeah, what team can do is like identify what works for them and what doesn't work for them, and basically inspect and adapt, and you identify what is the right thing for you. And if something is not working, certain process, like certain changes are not working, you can always remove that. As a philosophy goes, reduce waste. Something should not be followed just because it was in the technical bible of this process. So just see if that is adding value to the team, to the to achieve the end user goal, follow it. Otherwise, skip it. But at the end of the day, you have to see that the team is having a focus on collaboration and communication. And Agile definitely is very flexible on what team can follow and what team need not follow. It doesn't have any say in that. It's all about the team who can decide. But definitely, there's one thing which should be there is like identify certain way of doing things and stick to that. So in that way, there's a rhythm established. You can't just keep changing the processes all the time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yep. All right. So the next question I have is for Jerry. Choosing a framework without checking or validating your outcomes, When you have a hammer, everything looks like a nail. What's your
Yeah.
thoughts on that?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, again, back with the analogies, and I like this toolbox idea, but when you think about it, each tool in that agile toolbox is meant to serve a different purpose, right? No two tools serve the exact same purpose. So where we see a lot of problems can occur with organizations is where someone becomes familiar with a single tool, like a single aspect of agility. So they actually become very dangerous. They're very dangerous. They can cause grief. In other words, they're suffering from that analogy that if you have a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail. So if we continue with that analogy, let's assume I have a carpenter's hammer, right? That's primarily designed to pound nails into objects. Typically, it's for two pieces of wood and to join them. Well, there's other ways to join wood, and I shouldn't necessarily use a hammer for them. So for example, if you have screws, right, I wouldn't recommend using a hammer on screws. It's not going to end well. But I do recommend that you use a screwdriver to attach those two pieces of wood. So the same outcomes, different purposes. But using the wrong tool can be really troublesome. And similarly with agile practices, what we're seeing is we see people becoming familiar with the Signal Agile framework, an approach or a method, and then they apply it without really knowing what their real outcomes are. What are the problems they're trying to solve? So they come up with a solution without even really understanding what their problems are, let alone the conditions that are required to make that transition or that change successful. So we're talking about change, fundamental change, which is really difficult to get people to do. So, for example, learning Scrum in a 2-day class and then applying it holistically everywhere without understanding the true purpose of Scrum, what it's meant for, where it works well, where it may struggle, and what you need to help support a Scrum team, right? It's not just plug and play. Or if you choose a scaling approach, and I'm not going to mention any specifically, but if you choose one because you took a certification course or you read an article or you know somebody else that used it, without realizing and recognizing the surrounding expectations and needs and consequences of that approach, or choosing even a disruptive approach where you need an evolutionary one, or vice versa, where you're cautious when you're facing something like an extinction level threat. So what I'm trying to say is when we talk about agile practices, you need to be very strategic. Why are you choosing agile? First of all, be very clear on that. Make sure it's going to align with you. Then if you choose an approach, make sure it's fit for purpose, that it's appropriate for you. Do what makes sense. And at the end of the day, don't assume everything is a nail.
Yep, makes perfect sense. For teams who want to gradually adopt Agile, what are some of the things they must do to get started? And this is a bit of a loaded question. And as a pragmatic Agile practitioner, that's what I call myself, I think the first place to start are the daily scrums. Even if you're not following the Scrum process as religiously, if you just do the daily scrums where the entire team comes together for a half an hour or 15-minute call, and you just do a round table, as opposed to having communication over just emails or some other tools, I think it makes a huge difference. You can see like how the progress is moving, how the progress is happening, how the teams are moving, and it also transfers ownership onto an individual. Like this is what I have seen is the biggest differentiator. When people are on these daily Scrum calls and they're representing their own work, they have this ownership that they cannot just show up and say no updates. They need to have some work and they have to demonstrate like how much value they're adding. And it's all in good sense, right? Not like to monitor how much people are working and all that, but it basically keeps the momentum. So for teams who want to adopt Agile, I would say having a daily scrum where the entire team shows up, they have a roundtable discussions, discuss any roadblocks, any potential challenges, best place to start. And then gradually you can do some of the finer things like the backlog grooming and sprint planning and retrospective. Those things can come later, but start with the daily scrums. All right. It's not willing to set teams for success, regardless of whether it is agile or not, that is constantly changing the team structure, membership, focus, vision, environment, extra, which reverts the team back to the forming stage and never lets them get past storming, let alone performing. What would be your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so success is not an overnight thing for sure. So everybody needs time. So we need to give that time for them, and without interfering with them, and we need to give time. So eventually they will ramp up, like, like your velocity chart, right? Initially it probably would be low, but once they get a grip on the project, they'll probably ramp up. And so we shouldn't be measuring the success, every day, but, see if they're actually going up the ramp, but not, going down. So that's one thing. So it's like, they have to be very careful with that. And another thing is like, once the sprint starts, don't, introduce scope creep like we have just discussed, and make sure that there is no interference with the team members in between in the sprint cycle. Other thing, the autonomous teams are more performant than people who are, waiting for the instructions. So give them the full autonomy, and of course keep observing whether they're doing the right thing or not. But we have to give them autonomy so that they can feel they're empowered, make the decisions, and do the things. But otherwise, they'll be always waiting for some decision to be made by someone and follow it. So give them the autonomy. And another thing is like that defines success is the retros, right? Giving proper retrospective meetings, identify the improvement areas, do SWOT analysis, like, where are the opportunities, weaknesses, and other things, do the SWOT analysis, identify some things which you want to carry forward in the next sprint. And as Jerry said, like, celebrate success. And in the retrospective, you appreciate the team members who did help the others, or they did out of the box and other things. So that they become motivated. Once they're motivated, and uh, they do work more, and they deliver value, and they become successful. So
Yeah,
that's
it's
what I
more
would say.
fulfilling engagement too, right, for them.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So other thing, as that's not part of the what our team is, right? But there is a supporting structure. Like, do we have the infrastructure ready for them? Do we have the environment ready for them? Are there dependencies where they are waiting? So if there are some dependencies, or if the environments are not good, or the database is slow, those things also will probably walk down the team. So we have to make sure these things are also good to be successful.
Okay, thanks, Rangana. Next one is for Jerry. Leadership claiming to be agile, but not creating an environment that encourages and embraces, I cannot pronounce this, empiricism, including experimentation, continuous learning, and continuous improvement. In brackets, failure is not an option. What's your
Yes.
thoughts?
Yeah. Yeah, this is, we see this over and over again, where leadership says we're going agile and literally hand it over to the teams to actually do it without realizing that leadership is pivotal. I mentioned this earlier. They're pivotal to the success of agility. They need to change their mindset as well. And, when we think about the reasons why, I mean, agility is based on that empiricism, and empiricism is aligned with that scientific method where we run experiments to learn, we inspect, we adapt, and we improve. And it could be the products, the services, the way we work, our system, how we think, and those sorts of things. So if you think of this PDCA, plan, do, check, act, or adjust cycles, it's also known as the Schwartz cycle. Those are the types of things that we're talking about, is these fast learning loops. We need to recognize as leaders that not every experiment is going to be successful, right? The light bulb, the airplane, heavens, anything complex wasn't invented or perfected on the first try. Agility demands that we accept there may be setbacks, there may be failures, right? That doesn't mean we strive for failure. What it means is we use them as learning opportunities. So as a leader, as an organization, or as a culture, if we claim or act that failure is not an option, or if we respond very negatively towards a failure event, we're setting the teams up for failure if we expect them to use Agile, because we end up with dissonance. People are hearing one thing, but they're seeing a completely different behavior. It's not aligned with agility. Now, I'm not saying that failure is not an option is a bad thing. Okay, I'm just saying it's not aligned or compatible with some environments and cultures that are trying to use Agile. I've worked at numerous places that claim to create, sort of embrace this agility. But as soon as anything goes wrong, the leaders start pointing fingers, delaying blame, and even firing people. I've seen that as a result, rather than trying to fix the system that is supporting these people in trying to do their jobs. So you need to be clear on your outcomes. What are we trying to do? And we need to be critical whether agility and this mindset shift is really fit for purpose, because sometimes it's not. My favorite principle in the Agile Manifesto, when you think about it, actually talks about this. It says, build projects around motivated individuals, give them the environment and the support they need, and trust them to get the job done. Now, trust is a very difficult thing to work with. It's very difficult to earn, very easy to lose, and then very difficult to regain. But this means Agile leaders, it needs to be bi-directional. They need to cultivate and nurture an environment that encourages this experimentation, one that looks at failures as an opportunity, okay? Now, I'm not saying we purposely try to fail or we allow a train wreck to happen, but we should have a bias for action, and we should ring fence the conditions around an experiment, around a learning opportunity. Make the best judgments given the information we have at the time, because there are unknown unknowns. Talk about the outcomes, and then leverage what learnings we have, good or bad, because it's how we respond to those failures that differentiates us, whether or not we're using an Agile practice or maybe we shouldn't.
Okay, yeah, that resonates well with me. I fully agree with that. Next question is, are there instances or situations where waterfall is more effective over Agile? And the short answer is it depends. And the reason why I said that and is you can do as little Agile or as much Agile as you want. Like as I said earlier, even if the project scope is clearly defined, outcomes, the requirements are very clearly defined, very meticulous. In that scenario, you could just say that, sure, this can be done in 2 weeks. Let's talk in 2 weeks, or it can be done in a month. Let's talk in a month, right? Based on the budget, based on the time the product owner can invest into the project, all these factors are. But I personally don't really see why Agile can be fit. As I said earlier, you can at least do a daily Scrum call, right? When you're working, let's say you're the person who is in charge of delivering, and you have one developer working with you on this one. There is nothing that stops you from having that one-on-one call each day, just a touch point meeting. You call it the daily sprint or you call it a touch point meeting. But at the core, it's still like Agile. Like you are not waiting for that individual to come back to you after 3 weeks and saying that here is the product, and then you look at it and you say that no, this is not what I said. To avoid all of that, like difficult conversations or tricky situations, it's best to have like a daily touch point. So I don't really see why Agile cannot like fit, but maybe it's a hybrid between waterfall and Agile, but I would say that stick to Agile, at least the daily touch point meetings, and roll with that.
So Kalyan,
All
can I ask you a
Yeah.
question? Typically,
Yes.
when we were talking to clients, we sometimes they are hesitant about the time investment that's required with the daily scrums and daily stand-ups, whatever you call them. Even that if we say it's only 15 minutes. So how have you found that, once clients get used to the process, do they find that, oh, this is, great, or do they still find that, time is a challenge? What are you seeing in that area?
There is initial reluctance from some people that they don't want to commit that, oh, every day I have to show up and it's a 15-minute to half an hour call, and it doesn't work for my busy schedule, and if depending on the time of the day. But once like you have gone past the first week, second week, they tend to see the value of these daily scrums, and they see at the pace at which the project is moving along. They look at the delivery rate, and they see the value in these daily Scrum meetings. And if whatever reluctance there might be, in my experience so far, that goes away after the first sprint or maybe the second sprint. People tend to show up on daily sprint Scrum call.
Okay, great.
Okay. I'm not sure if this has been discussed earlier, but what are some of the top mistakes people make when adopting Agile?
Yeah. So again, Agile is an umbrella term, right? So we have various ways of doing things: Lean, Kanban, Scrum, XP, whatnot. So first thing we have to understand is like what they are developing, what are their composition, what versus application they are developing, I'd say. So all that has to be taken into consideration and take the right path sometimes it is driven by the company, but if you have a choice, you have to understand which one works best for you and take that one. If you know something, some kind of things need Scrum, sometimes things need Kanban. So you have to identify what way will work for you and use that particular agile methodology. And the second thing is like, you probably have to unlearn some of the past ways of doing things. You just say you're agile, but you're doing it the same way what you did when you're not using agile, then nothing can, all your past mistakes will happen here as well. And so other thing is like, it's just saying, doing an agile and doing a daily stand up of course is there, but there are other things like, you have to set up a streamlined flow. You have to create a team working agreement. You have to create a definition of done and all those best practices. What you have to lay down those best practices and stick to them. And probably you can tweak them in your retrospectives, but it's very ideal, very much ideal to have certain working agreement, definition of done, and in your communication, a well-established communication, like, you have a stand-up, you have a retrospective, you have a grooming, planning, whatever works. So you need to stick to that plan, and and you have to do that meticulously. Other thing, as I said, it's just not agile, but the supporting structure, which can be CI/CD tools, environment, or it can be support from the uh, the management, like, is your product owner available, is your architect available for rightly answering the questions. Otherwise, things will slow down. And so the supporting factors also should be there. Otherwise, agile probably will not, that space of agile may not work. And the other very important thing is effective sprint planning and sizing. If you're following Scrum, unless you do plan properly, do grooming properly, and you plan properly, take the right commitment, do the right estimate in sizing, you'll probably ending up, taking up more than what you can chew. And again, people will start, your sprint commitment is not met, and all those things happen. So all these things should be taken into consideration, and you can't be 100% correct in the first sprint. So use your retrospectives and then adopt. That's what I would say.
Okay, thanks. And this is the last question, and like this is my favorite one. What are some of the downfalls of Agile,
No.
if any?
Do we have enough time? We're going to run over on time here, I think, if I actually went into all of them. I'll try to focus it. But yeah, when you think about the downfalls of Agile, I think one of the key ones really is that there's this misinterpretation that Agile is a silver bullet. And it's not. It's not going to solve project or product or service problems. It doesn't fix your culture. It doesn't solve your technical issues. It doesn't streamline change management. It doesn't make your customers, your stakeholders, and your team members love you, right? But what it does is it creates the opportunity for those types of things by shining a light on the problems, right? It makes the issues critical and obvious through transparency, through this inspect and adapt cycle. It provides the opportunity for fast learning and for improvement. So it can be a real blessing if you have a learning mindset, but it can be a real pain in the, what, if you're trying to hide something, or if there's something where you just need to blow through it. So let's assume agility is a quick, easy, or cheap fix. Okay, that's a mistake. It's not. There's a lot around this mindset that really gets us there. So we talk about some of the other challenges that Agile practices have. It's not actually compatible with some environments, with some cultures, with some products or people or organizational cultures that we're talking about here. I've seen some real damage done by well-intentioned people. They had good intentions. They didn't maliciously attack their systems, but they didn't check to see if it even made sense to adopt agility. They didn't check to see if Agile was fit for purpose. In some cases, they actually caused more problems, more stress, and more confusion in the organization and for the teams and ultimately for the customers. So it needs to be this check and balance. Almost need a litmus test to say, are we compatible with Agile practices? And to go back to what was mentioned earlier, many times I've seen people do, I use the air quotes, Agile instead of be Agile, right? Agile isn't that checklist. It's an ongoing journey. It's that toolbox, that mindset. So your Agile maturity shouldn't be judged based on how many activities you do, or how many things on a checkbox you fill off, or how many things in a report you can do, right? I'm not convinced you should even measure agility at all. What we should be using agility for is this toolbox to help us mature our organization and our ways of working. So there's this whole mind shift that Agile causes problems with if it's not done properly. So the maturity models that you should be using to help measure how your organization grows, those should be looking at your ways of working, not just how many Agile practices you use. You're going to be set yourself up for failure. You're going to hit the glass ceiling pretty quickly. So agility may be challenged also. When I think about some other things just off the top of my head, they're well understood and agreed upon requirements. Maybe Agile isn't the most compatible approach. Doesn't mean you can't, but there are other techniques. If you have no real sense of urgency, Agile may or may not work particularly well for you. If there's no appetite for risk, for failure, for experimentation, if you're working with a purely fixed price model, it's going to be a little challenged. Now, again, it will work in all of these conditions, but I do see organizations struggle in trying to use Agile. And those are just some of the things where I see, Agile really does have some downfalls that we need to be careful with.
Okay. Right. So those wrap up. Back to you, Chinkan.
Great, thank you, everyone. So just to kind of segue off of Jerry's comment, agility is not about a rigid process. It really is about fostering an environment of collaboration, adaptability, and continuous improvement. And as today we explored the principles of Agile with Jerry's overview on the Agile mindset, got a high-level overview of the Scrum process, and we also had insightful discussions on some of the challenges with adopting Agile, what teams struggle with, and what are the things to look for when you're adopting the practice. As we come to a closure, I do want to thank our panelists, Jerry, Kalyan, and Ragnath, for participating. And stay tuned for additional episodes on navigating agility. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.